natural space station, laboratory for space research, home to human settlers. A new vision of the moon is taking shape. It is a far cry from the heavenly body that once inspired awe and reverence, witchcraft and lunacy, passion and romance. Since Apollo, we can't quite see the moon in the same way.
7, 6, 5,
The best and the brightest of American science and technology carried the Apollo astronauts into space. With them went the hopes and dreams of an entire world. In a sense, we all went to the moon.
Okay, Houston, we're maneuvering to the burn attitude. Roger, we copy that.
On the Apollo 12 mission, Alan Bean and Charles Conrad would be the second team to land there.
We're trying all these things that we didn't have in Gemini, like toothpaste and shaving, and we're really having a ball up here.
Roger. All dressed up and no place to go.
Oh, we're going someplace. We can see it getting bigger and bigger all the time. All three of us are plastered to the windows looking.
They had an ambitious goal, to land near the Surveyor, a robotic probe that had been sent to the moon nearly 3 years earlier to transmit photographs of the lunar surface.
Hey, Houston, the sim's running pretty today.
On the way there, Conrad had his doubts about the plan.
It wasn't supposed to be, but obviously the success of the flight depended on finding the surveyor. And so people always say, what did you worry about? Well, I mean, that's what I worried about. I worried, one, I wouldn't find it, and then it was never really clear to me how the scientists knew exactly where it was either.
Okay, got the old camera running.
Conrad couldn't wait to get down on the surface.
Down to the pin. Man, that may have been a small one for Neil, but that's a long one for me. I gotta take it easy and watch what I'm doing. Boy, you'll never believe it. That's what I see sitting on the side of the crater. The old surveyor, huh? The old surveyor, yes, sir. Does that look neat? It can't be any further than 600 feet from here.
Later, Conrad and Bean retrieved Surveyor's TV camera and mechanical scoop, both remarkably pristine after nearly 3 years of exposure. More importantly, the pinpoint landing proved scientists could safely land a spacecraft on a target 250,000 miles away. Conrad and Bean set up the first station of a science network to measure the moon's magnetic field, surface gases, the output of energy from the sun, and the occasional weak moonquake. Powered by a small nuclear generator, the instruments worked for years. Each Apollo mission added to the global picture. The 6 landing sites included mountainous areas and lowlands.
Oh, spectacular. Just spectacular. Wow.
On the last 3 missions, rovers provided greater mobility. Reaching a top speed of 10 miles per hour, the electrically powered moon buggies allowed astronauts to explore up to 6 miles from their landing site and to collect hundreds of pounds of rock and soil samples. With each mission, a new science station was added to the network.
I guess so. Keep it nice for the next guy.
Okay,
Cores of surface materials were drilled. Over 30,000 photographs were taken. Every moment of the astronauts' time was painstakingly scheduled for science activities. At the height of the Apollo program, a staggering 9 million instrument readings a day were beamed back to Earth, data which scientists continue to analyze today.
I put a mark in the deck. Here it is, right there.
Our knowledge of the moon is deeper and broader than for any other object in the solar system, except Earth. Geologists like Paul Spudis are reconstructing the history of the moon and have formulated a new theory about its origin.
Now, before the Apollo landings, there were 3 ideas of lunar origin. The idea was that the moon and Earth formed jointly The other idea is that the moon was captured. It was formed in a different part of the solar system and captured into Earth orbit. And finally, the idea was that the moon fissioned from the early Earth, spun off when the Earth was spinning very rapidly early in its history. Well, we found out from Apollo none of those ideas are really tenable. And in fact, we needed Apollo to give us an appreciation for the importance that impact plays in early geological history. And now the current favorite idea for lunar origin is that a giant planet hit the Earth 4.5 billion years ago, and that effectively splashed material into Earth orbit. And that material accreted very rapidly to form the moon.
The early solar system was a chaotic place. Hurtling through space, a planet the size of Mars struck the Earth. So great was the impact that part of our planet's surface was melted and ejected into space. Some material fell back to Earth. Some remained in orbit. Over tens of millions of years, the orbiting debris coalesced into a new celestial body. And the moon was born. If the theory is true, then the moon is indeed the 8th continent, a chip off the Earth's block. By 4.5 billion years ago, the geometry of the Earth-Moon system was in place. At first a molten sphere, the moon soon began to cool. Meteorites relentlessly pelted its surface. Around 3.8 billion years ago, the bombardment seems to have reached a cataclysmic peak, leaving the huge craters that are still visible on the moon today. Then, the violence subsided. For millions of years, lava welled up through cracks in the crater floors, creating the smooth, dark areas called maria. A steady rain of lesser impacts pulverized the surface into powdery soil. Little else has changed in the last 3 billion years. Today, the moon is a dead world, a time capsule, each crater a tick in the geologic clock. Its battered surface preserves a record of our solar system's violent birth and the evolution of the planets. This window on the past has led to a profound insight. The events that left their mark on the moon must have shaped its planetary partner as well. The primordial Earth was showered with meteorites. Some say this may have set up the conditions that allowed life to begin. But most traces of this early time are gone. Unlike the moon, the Earth evolves. Continents shift and collide. Geology is erased and rewritten. Scientists suspect that life has been shaped by bombardment from outer space, by impacts powerful enough to disrupt global climate and trigger mass extinctions. Such catastrophic events have been linked to the demise of the dinosaurs some 65 million years ago. One theory holds that periodically, about every 26 million years, meteorites wipe out most life on the planet. Fossils alone cannot prove the point. But a pattern of periodic impacts on the moon coinciding with mass extinctions on Earth would lend credence to the theory.
So the idea is that you would go to the moon, you would look at a large variety of craters on the surface that have formed since about 3 billion years ago, collect impact melt rocks from them and date them. And that way you could resolve this question definitively. Is there a periodicity in the cratering record or not? So that's one example of where studying craters on the moon actually has fairly profound implications for the history of life on the Earth.
Scattered like fossils across this landscape are clues to the origin of life and the evolution of creatures bold enough to dream throughout the ages of traveling to another world.
Boy, is this a neat way to travel. Isn't it great? I like to skip along. But me, boy.
From launch to landing, each mission was controlled by a command post 250,000 miles away. Lunar advocates see a return to the moon in a different light.
Well, settling the moon is something that occurs after an exploration. If you look at the west, you had the mountain men go off, and then what happened next were the traders who kind of traded with the mountain men, and then you had the forts that came along and protected the traders. Then you had the settlements build up along the forts, and there was kind of a progression and a sequence. And I've argued that the Apollo astronauts represent the mountain men, as it were. They represent the legends and the mythical beings, that where we are now is to try to put down some roots and some permanence.
If we're to do anything other than visit the moon sporadically and maintain a base there, as we do today in Antarctica, if we are to indeed grow and flourish there, we must develop the capability to live off the land.
Water, shelter, hunting grounds, fertile soil. Such are the resources settlers have sought all over Earth. What does the moon have to offer? No life has ever sprung from this surface. Days and nights last 2 weeks each. Temperatures soar to 260 degrees Fahrenheit and drop to minus 270. Cosmic and solar radiation sear the land. Here, the laws of nature rule a hostile and alien world, as astronaut Dave Scott so clearly demonstrated.
Well, in my left hand, I have a feather. In my right hand, a hammer. And I guess one of the reasons we got here today was because of a gentleman named Galileo a long time ago, who made a rather significant discovery about falling objects in gravity fields. And we thought that where would be a better place to confirm his findings than on the moon. And so we thought we'd try it here for you. The feather happens to be appropriately a falcon feather for our falcon. And I'll drop the two of them here, and hopefully they'll hit the ground at the same time. How about that?
In this vacuum, there is no atmosphere, no weather, no sound. Because the moon is smaller than the Earth, its gravity is only 1/6 as strong. A fully suited Apollo astronaut would tip our scales at 360 pounds.
Off the ground, one more. There we go.
On the moon, he weighed a mere 60. All this conspires to make the loose soil a serious nuisance.
Well, everything's getting awful dusty. Boy, everything is stiff. Everything is just full of dust. There's got to be a point where the dust just overtakes you and everything mechanical quits moving.
One astronaut would say his dust brush was his most important tool. Any disturbance of the soil lifts a spray of particles which tend to cling to anything they encounter,
Can I change your oil?
including camera lenses.
Thank you, Dino. It looks much better.
It's hardly a Garden of Eden. And yet this sterile world has much to offer if you know what to look for.